And you said that was actually the first time you remember there being conversations about folks trying to make bids on WrestleMania and try to court WrestleMania to come to their city. And you remember that X7 is really the first time that happened. Carry me through the process and how WrestleMania came to Houston.
Well, there was a group, and well, still is a group. It's the largest building management group in the world, SMG. And SMG at the time had, in 1998, I guess it was 1999, in that time frame, they were purchasing stadiums, and they were purchasing. They built a lot of arenas. They manage all the arenas, and they were broadening their horizons by going out and purchasing stadiums to manage as well. So SMG had just purchased the rights to take over management for the Houston Astrodome. Mike McGee, who was president of SMG, started SMG. It was his company. Mike McGee had been the building manager of the Summit in Houston, Texas. He's the one who built the Summit, and his company managed the Summit along with many other buildings across the world. And Mike's company had just come in, and along with Jeff Gaines, who at that time was the manager of the Summit. They were going to sell the Summit, and Compaq Center had the naming rights, but they were in the process of selling the Summit to Joel Osteen and Joel Osteen's church. But throughout all of this, Mike McGee and Jeff Gaines came up in the middle of a show while we were doing a Monday Night Raw at the Compaq Center, hashtag Summit or /Summit. And they said, hey, we're running the dome now. We want WrestleMania. What do we have to do? And Briscoe and I, almost at the same time, said, pay us. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, you pay for the Super Bowl, don't you? So yeah, but that's the Super Bowl. I said, oh, fuck that. You want WrestleMania, pay for it. And they kind of looked at each other and ran away. Show's going on and so on and so forth. And at the end of the night, Mike and Jeff met with Vince and told him they were interested in having WrestleMania there and so on and so forth. Long story short, they came back to us and they created a very unique agreement that enabled us to come into Houston, come into the Astrodome, along with all of the Astro facilities, the Astro Hall, the Astro Arena. We utilized all of the facilities on the grounds for WrestleMania, for fan access, and to be able to have an entire week of WWF events. So that was the first time that a building and or a city had come in and said, we want you to bring WrestleMania here. We're willing to make it attractive for you. Now, it's nothing like it is now. However, that was the first one. That was the first step of being that brand that the cities wanted and that buildings wanted to bring in. And they had no idea the effect that it would have on the city and the bottom line. And that's when those studies really started taking place and taking hold, how much revenue that we would bring into a city when we would come in for a week. So this particular show was the model and the first one to come in, and everybody wanted to work with us, and we made it work. And it was the doings of Jeff Gaines and Mike McGee on the building side and on the city side that made all of that happen.
You going to give us an idea of how the deal would be structured or what it looked like?
Well, it was just made it so that there was no money out of our pocket. In addition, we had, I believe it was the first national, we really had two national sponsors, but one of them had to be a local sponsor. The national sponsor, I believe, was Mars, but it was we had a national sponsorship that kicked in. We also had a local sponsorship, which was Gallery Furniture, which spent a lot of money to make the WrestleMania the success that it was locally. And that helped because Mattress Mac, my good friend Jim McIngvale and Gallery Furniture, they were looking to go national as well during that time. So it gave them an awful lot of exposure. It was, I don't know that there was a whole lot, and I don't know per se. I know that there wasn't a lot of money exchanged on the building side and the city side. However, there were a lot of things that were made available to us that wouldn't have been made available to us. In addition to that, there wasn't a large outlay of money on our part.
So do you believe
they absorbed a lot of that?
Do you believe you got the dome for free or nearly free?
I say we got an unbelievable deal on the dome and the facilities all around it.
Okay.
For that use. And in addition to that, we got promotional value locally. We were on roughly 200 trucks that were around the city every single day, Gallery Furniture, from the moment that Mac shook our hand and we announced WrestleMania. Mac had 200 trucks wrapped in WrestleMania logos and stars. His trucks looked like the WWE trucks look now. And they were all over Houston every single day, 200 trucks. In addition to that, every single one of his advertisements, which he's on, you turn on the TV in Houston, anytime during the day, Mattress Mac was on Save You Money. And don't forget, WrestleMania at the Astrodome, Reliant Astrodome. But it was a promotion that was absolutely unbelievable. And on top of that, when we went in to talk to Mattress Mac originally, we were looking for just such a small amount of money because that's what we were used to. And in the meeting, I've known Mac since I was a kid, and he says, "What kind of money are you looking for?" And before Bob Collins could get it out, I said $1 million. And Mac laughed, but he didn't say no. And he walked around with a very large check in his pocket is the down payment for probably 3 weeks, and just waiting to give it to us because we kept on saying we were going to be in town and we would miss each other. But he paid an ungodly amount of money. And when I say that, in advertising that absolutely could not have been replicated and that nobody could have afforded on their own. But on his rotation, about buying in bulk for advertising locally. Mac was on every station, pretty much damn near every break. And in every single ad, he had either Ric Flair or Eddie Guerrero, Eric Bischoff. No, Eric Bischoff wasn't on that one. He was on a later one. But we had just everybody under the sun on those shows. And Flair wasn't on that one either. It was on the later one. But it was insane.
That's interesting to me that you still used a local businessman for that. And it was for such a gargantuan amount of cash. But nonetheless, an interesting story. Talk to me a little bit about, when you decide that you're going to run a dome, how far in advance do you ink a deal like this with the city, with the chamber, with the building, whoever? How many months in advance do you know we're coming to this dome for this show on this day?
We knew a year in advance.
Now, allegedly behind the scenes now, there may be multiples, but there is at least one guy who does nothing but work on WrestleMania. And this year at WrestleMania, he'll already be working on next year's.
Correct. Before this year's WrestleMania, they were working on, Tampa pretty much almost last year. Once they had secured New Jersey, I'm sure they were working on the next one after that.
Not just, the actual building itself, but they start working on the stage and they start working on, where all the hotel, all the logistics of the actual show. And then just the massive undertaking it is to get all the other pieces of this show outside of the stadium together. Right.
Absolutely. And at the time that man was Bob Collins, and Bob was a promoter's promoter. He wasn't a marketing guy. He was a promoter. He came from Ringling Brothers, and he loved the hype. He loved getting out and creating new and different ways to promote events. So Bob eventually became the WrestleMania guy, and that was all he did. He and his staff worked on WrestleMania all year long to make it the biggest event. And you always have to be thinking ahead as to what's next, because once you get one secured, that's the beginning of the work. Now you have to do everything else. But also in the middle of that, you have to be thinking about the next year and where you're going to go and what you're going to do with it then.